They purport themselves to be the good guys, on the right side of history, as they carry out some of the most blatant racial discrimination since the Civil Rights Movement. Welcome back everyone, and hello if you're new here. This is Thinking Things Over. In this video, we're going to cover some pretty tame topics. We're not going to get into anything too controversial. Just kidding. Today we're talking about affirmative action. Now, I know people have a lot of strong opinions about this, but genuinely consider what I'm saying here. I'm going to be transparent in my argument, and hopefully you'll consider it honestly. Okay, let's talk quickly about what affirmative action is. Most of you probably have an idea, but we should all start on the same page. Affirmative action can manifest in a lot of different ways, from hard quotas to targeted recruitment. But the key idea is that an institution, whether it be the government, employers, universities, or something else, will A, seek to identify groups that have suffered discrimination or setbacks, and B, create practices to try to address the perceived inequalities, aka take affirmative action. So hopefully we all have a common understanding now of what we're talking about. On the surface, many supporters of affirmative action are well-meaning. Most proponents are compassionate people that want to work towards correcting injustice. But there are also concerning undercurrents that drive affirmative action forward. In the general perception, the affirmative action ideal, the vision, is the eventual creation of a world in which people can progress and achieve as people, as individuals, irrespective of insignificant characteristics like skin color or sexuality. As affirmative action is marketed, once preferential policies are implemented for a period of time, the effects of past discrimination will be counterbalanced, and we'll live in a world where people of all different groups will be represented in acceptable proportions throughout education and academia, in the workforce, in the government, and so on. This depiction is the big lie. It is propaganda. The picture that I have just painted is the narrative that agents of affirmative action have used to trick the highest courts and persuade much of the general public. Let me be clear. I am now talking about the agents of affirmative action, not simply supporters. I am not talking about everyday people who consider themselves socially progressive. I am talking about the agents of the mission, the administrators in the universities, the ones creating the policies and making admissions decisions. I am talking about the heads of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion departments at major corporations. I am talking about the people behind the scenes who make appointments and promotions within the government. And I'm talking about the army of lawyers defending these people's actions in the courts. Despite the story they might create for you, these people's actions reveal the fairy tale ending of social inequality to be little more than a facade to behave in their own self-interest. In 2003, the Supreme Court case Grutter v. Bollinger addressed the question of whether or not racial preferences in higher education admissions was constitutional. In the controversial ruling of the court, the majority decided that the Constitution does permit a narrowly tailored use of race to further the interest of pursuing the benefits resulting from a diverse student body. But in the majority ruling, the court declared that, quote, race-conscious admissions policies must be limited in time. The court takes the law school at its word that it would like nothing more than to find a race-neutral admissions formula and terminate its use of racial preferences as soon as practicable. The court expects that 25 years from now, the use of racial preferences will no longer be necessary to further the interest approved today, end quote. Now, there are questions to be raised as to how a practice might be considered constitutional one day, yet unconstitutional in the future, without the anticipation of relevant legal changes in the meantime. In fact, Justice Clarence Thomas echoed this point in his dissent, writing that, quote, while I agree that in 25 years the practices of the law school will be illegal, they are illegal now, end quote. Fast forward to fall 2022. 19 years after the Grutter decision, the Supreme Court heard arguments for Students for Fair Admissions Incorporated versus President and Fellows of Harvard College and Students for Fair Admissions Incorporated versus University of North Carolina. Harvard is a private university, but it accepts federal funding, so it is subject to Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That legislation outlaws racial discrimination. Under the current standards set in large part by the Grutter case, race-conscious admissions policies are legal if they pass the strict scrutiny standard, requiring that race serves a compelling government interest, like the benefits resulting from a diverse student body, and are narrowly tailored to that end. But the Supreme Court is not simply deciding if Harvard and UNC's practices meet the standard, they are considering the validity of the standards from Grutter in the first place. Are the standards constitutional? According to the decision from 2003, affirmative action should be largely unnecessary by now, and that stance, that legality might change without the law changing, is in and of itself nonsensical. Bottom line, the Supreme Court is now reconsidering that quirky precedent set back in 2003. With all of this, the evidence presented in the latest Harvard case, for which a decision has not yet been made, coupled with information from previous decisions, can give us some insight into the true intentions of the agents of affirmative action. The agents are not motivated by a benevolent social justice imperative. Rather, they manipulate and pervert the language and intentions of social progressivism to suit themselves. These agents maintain the veneer of social progressivism to reap the benefits of affecting a compassionate, enlightened public image, and to usurp the authority to carry out large-scale social engineering projects and further their pretentious, misguided utopian ambitions. Their actions reveal that they are not committed to achieving the stated end goal, a world where affirmative action becomes unnecessary. They have every incentive to continue these programs in perpetuity. Let me explain. Currently, colleges present their holistic admissions processes as allowing them to consider applicants from a multitude of different perspectives. They purport that race is just one of the many factors that goes into a holistic college admissions decision. This claim has two major downfalls. 1. Considering race as a factor is hypocritical when the broader ideology would claim to believe in moving past stereotypes. And 2, the facts regarding prestigious college admissions show that they are not treating race as one of many factors, but are actually using it to implement soft quotas, and that they rely on racial stereotypes to do so. Candidates should be chosen based upon a broad look at their abilities, qualifications, and background. But racial holistic admissions are garbage. To make the claim, as the agents of affirmative action do, that knowing the race of an applicant is meaningful is deeply hypocritical. To insist that race is useful amongst other factors is also to insist that it means something in and of itself, in a vacuum. Otherwise, the factor of race could be completely neglected, but they fight tooth and nail to keep it. With this, the admissions department at Harvard, and many other schools, is signaling that simply knowing the race of an applicant, in total isolation, can indicate valuable information about the applicant. That's it. They are insisting that race alone can, in some capacity, indicate to an admissions committee an applicant's aptitude for college. Again, when considered in the greater context of social progressivism, of battling stereotypes, this stance is extremely hypocritical. These people will claim to be propelling us forward to a colorblind future while simultaneously relying on racial stereotyping to execute their plans. Worse, they are clearly using the racial information to invoke negative stereotypes and actively discriminate against certain groups. In the Harvard case, the plaintiffs had access to Harvard admissions files from 2014 to 2019. The plaintiffs found that Harvard admissions officers, the agents of affirmative action, routinely rated Asian American applicants lower than others on subjective personal traits. These subjective ratings were used in conjunction with racial information in their holistic processes. These traits include things like courage, likability, and positive personality. Additionally, these lower personal trait ratings disproportionately came from admissions officers at Harvard who were just looking at the applications. Asian American applicants who met with and were interviewed by Harvard alumni had more comparable personal trait ratings to other groups. Harvard doesn't even deny these things. They conceded that Asian American applicants received consistently worse personal trait scores, although they insisted that they do not believe that some racial groups have better personal qualities than others. But the evidence is crystal clear. When it came down to it, Asian students as a group had the strongest academic scores and the lowest personal scores. On the other hand, African American applicants consistently scored the highest on personal scores and the lowest on academic metrics. This becomes really problematic when we look at who ends up being admitted and, in particular, how many of each group over time. Racial quotas are illegal. Another landmark affirmative action case, Regents of the University of California v. Bakke, held that a policy at the University of California Davis School of Medicine, which reserved 16 out of 100 seats in each entering class for minority students, was illegal. Quotas for specific racial groups has been illegal since the 70s, but, as the plaintiffs in the Harvard case allege, the school has been using soft quotas. Harvard does not have a specific quota system, but the proportion of Asian students admitted has remained curiously similar over time despite major growth in the number of Asian applicants. It seems as though Harvard has an idea of how many Asians they want to admit while leaving room for people from other groups, many of which have markedly inferior academic credentials versus some Asians who do not get accepted. This is similar in essence to a quota. Duke University economist Peter Arcidiacono testified on behalf of the plaintiffs that, statistically, if an Asian with a certain set of characteristics like test scores, extracurricular activities, and so on, applied to Harvard had a 25% chance of acceptance, the same applicant, if white, would have a 36% likelihood of admission. A Hispanic applicant would have a 77% chance. A black applicant with the same characteristics, only the race changed, would have a 95% likelihood of admission. This is not what a genuine holistic admissions process looks like. Race alone should not account for a 70% spread in admission likelihood, all else equal. Schools are not treating race like a detail about an applicant. It's phony to consider race at all when advocating the end of stereotyping, but even at that, these schools are treating race, which an applicant cannot control, as a significant factor in the college admissions process. Why are they doing this? It is clearly not an exercise in racial equality. In fact, it's extremely discriminatory. One of the most offensive aspects of the controversy is the fact that prestigious educational institutions often present themselves as bastions of social justice and are simultaneously among the worst offenders of acting on racial bias. Frankly, pretentious intellectual culture is a primary driver for these behaviors. Essentially, highly educated administrators have a superiority complex and believe it is their job to engineer a post-racial society. This is despite the fact that they themselves are both the only ones calling on them to do it or designating them qualified to try. The upper crust of academia, university administration, and DEI departments is a self-sustaining, isolated bubble, which derives its sense of self-importance from those within the bubble. Never mind that the architects of the post-racial world are among the most guilty of racial stereotyping. Never mind that these people are the ones with the most racialized worldview. They are the ones qualified to design our racial, educational, economic, governmental utopia because they say they are. As the agents of affirmative action are manufacturing a diversity aesthetic at their institutions, they are depriving real people of real opportunities in the process. They purport themselves to be the good guys, on the right side of history, as they carry out some of the most blatant racial discrimination since the Civil Rights Movement. The moral appeals and virtue signaling cover up a sinister underbelly of the social progressive movement. It's true, some groups have had it harder than others and suffered more injustices throughout American history, but we should be skeptical of the elite administrators in universities, corporations, and the government, and their motives and capacity to right wrongs. Their track record is shaky at best. There's also an abundance of evidence that affirmative action isn't even helpful for those who are supposed to be directly benefiting from it. Underqualified students may be done more harm than good by being placed into schools for which they are not up to academic standards. So, despite affirmative action's shortcomings, why does it continue? Because the greatest beneficiaries of the system are the agents. Why are they more staunch in their defense of the system than ever, even after enough time has gone by, that evidence should have indicated that their efforts have had positive consequences? Because it's not about the underprivileged students. It's about their social currency within their elite bubble. They can make themselves and make each other feel good. It doesn't matter if the programs themselves are extraordinarily prejudicial and might not help their supposed beneficiaries anyway. If you are in the bubble and you've bought into the system, you're happy to play the game because of the social rewards conferred onto you. It comes with affirmation from your peers, and broader social benefits too, like the prestige of being associated with the university or corporation, and admiration from some for your supposed benevolence. Often, these people conceptualize themselves as saviors. Consciously or not, they conceive of themselves as a savior, an affluent, privileged, educated person who is a liberator, a rescuer to the disadvantaged. This psychological self-aggrandizement is the true prize for those who drive the system forward. There is an aspect of compassion involved in this, but the dynamic, the pity, has an air of condescension. Despite the lack of evidence of affirmative action success, the agents are firm in their belief in the system, while they are also the ones who have the most to gain from its continuation. Also, none of this is to say that underprivileged people shouldn't have access to higher education or jobs, or that they should only get these things based on narrow standards of achievement. A holistic process is good, colorblind. A person should be admitted, promoted, etc. based upon their merits as an individual, based upon what they have done in their circumstances with the opportunities that they have been given. They should be considered as an individual, not as a member of a race. People are greater, more complex than the color of their skin. There is a vast array of factors that should be considered when deciding what opportunities have been earned by who. Race is not one of them. With the upcoming Supreme Court ruling, I believe it is likely that affirmative action will at least be more restricted, if not made illegal. If this happens, you will undoubtedly hear about how the court is trying to bring us back in time, roll back the clock, and create and enforce a racial hierarchy or things to that effect. Before you take these opinions at their word, think twice about who wants you to believe these things and why. In my opinion, we will soon have colorblind admissions, and holistic ones at that. This is a good thing. People should be able to progress according to their demonstrated aptitude and their personal circumstance. They should not be propelled forward or held back according to faceless administrators' racial biases. I enjoyed talking with you all. I'm Johnathon McCartney, and this is Thinking Things Over. I hope to see you again soon. Thanks.